What's up, Taiwan? I'm Eric Gao with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. President Tsai will visit Eswatini in early September. The presidential office announced Tsai's travel plans on Friday. Her visit will span 4 days and 3 nights. During her trip, Tsai will attend ceremonies celebrating the country's 55th Independence Day, as well as the birthday of the reigning monarch, King Eswatini III. The country is Taiwan's only remaining ally in Africa. Taiwan is planning to spend a record $19 billion on defense next year. The initial budget plan was approved by the cabinet on Thursday. It puts defense spending at around 2.5% of the country's GDP. Taiwan has increased its military budget every year since President Tsai took office in 2016. Military officials say part of the budget will be used to pay for U.S. hardware like long-range strike weapons and advanced tanks, set to arrive in Taiwan in 2024. Now, Taiwan's military has invested heavily into systems like tanks and fighter jets, but the war in Ukraine has shown that bigger doesn't always mean better. Jaime Ocon reports on a company that's hoping to use new technology to enhance Taiwan's defense.
This T-shaped device might look like a household appliance, but it's actually an advanced defense system. It's called the TRadar Pro, and it's used to monitor and defend against small drones that could pose a threat to Taiwan.
So this is a drone detection radar. It's a very lightweight, small. It can be put into a carry-on locker, so a single soldier can easily carry it. And once you take this item out of the luggage box, and we can simply just open this up, and then press the power up item and the button, and then the system will start running in roughly 10 minutes.
Weighing in at roughly 15 kilograms, it's much smaller than a conventional radar, which is usually fixed in a certain location and can't move.
And then I can see others, I can track it as well.
Once connected, this synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, uses special radio waves to create a real-time map of any drones or aircraft flying within 5 kilometers.
The invading drones can be as simple as a civilian, like DJI type drone, which can be easily taken down by a jammer, but it could be a hostile drone, like a military drone or like quasi-military drone.
Small civilian drones like the Chinese-made DJI pose a unique threat to militaries around the world. They're cheap, can be modified to carry weapons, and can capture and record video for surveillance purposes. Russia's war in Ukraine has seen small drones like these used to attack enemy vehicles and soldiers. And last year, this kind of threat made its way to Taiwanese territory. In August of 2022, in the outlying islands of Jinmen, a Chinese drone flew over a Taiwanese military base, and 2 soldiers tried to bring it down by throwing rocks at it. This gap in Taiwan's defense has pushed the military to invest more in a solution, and these radars are the first step.
And we're going to see some serious deployment in the next 2 or 3 years across Taiwan, and Taiwan is likely being the first nation in the world with such capability deployed.
This push for smaller, more mobile systems is part of what many call an asymmetric defense strategy. This means more small, mobile systems like shoulder-fired rocket launchers, anti-air missiles, and anti-tank weapons. But these weapons only work if you know where the enemy is. And that's why these radars are critical, because they enable Taiwan to increase its security without breaking the bank.
Still radar, but it's a new type of radar that architecture-wise, technological-wise, the manufacturing cost can be dramatically reduced. So we didn't expect that, but we just think that if we have a system that is good enough and is as a low cost can be produced in large volume, then we will find a good market for that.
Analysts say that Taiwan's military already operates a handful of radars, and the country can integrate different technologies and combine these systems to create a robust and complete defense of its airspace.
你固定的这种大型的正规雷达被摧毁的时候，你至少还是有一个小型的雷达可以展开一个我们称为 Air Defense Umbrella， 就是防空伞，可以维持局部的空优。这一点就是我们刚才强调了，从乌克兰战争中学到很多的这个 lesson。
The next step for the company is mass production, and it's hoping that in the coming months, it can work more closely with the military, deploying hundreds of radars across Taiwan to defend the country's airspace. Justin Wu, Joyce Tsang, and Jaime Okan for TaiwanPlus.
In world news, BRICs, the group of 5 of the world's biggest emerging economies, says it will admit more members. At a meeting of the member states' leaders, they decided that 6 countries will join current members Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, with the possibility of further expansion in the future. BRICs was formed 13 years ago to improve economic cooperation between member states and to counter the West. Brazilian President Lula da Silva said new members will be chosen based on geopolitical weight, not ideology. But experts warn the expansion could further hamper decision-making within the group, which requires consensus. For more on what the BRICS summit means for the global balance of power, our reporter Stash Butler spoke to the editor-in-chief of the China Global South Project, Eric Olander.
When I spoke to you last, you said you expected 1 or perhaps 2 members to join, but instead we saw 6. Well, what does that mean?
The fact that they chose Iran, again, that was not something I expected on the first round. I was expecting Iran later on because Iran is such a contentious choice with the US and Europe that now has to confront an organization that has 3 of its most outspoken foes, Russia, China, and Iran in it. The other thing that was surprising was to see how Brazil, South Africa, and India really made a conscious decision to go against US and European interests and policies here, particularly with the vote on Iran.
So do you see this as a sort of setback for the US?
No doubt this is a setback for the US and for Europe too. I mean, there is absolutely no way to couch this, that in many ways this was a giant middle finger from this group to the US and Europe. And on top of it, they chose Russia as next year's venue for the summit. So in many ways, you're seeing the diminished influence of G7 countries and how decades and decades of neglect and duplicity and hypocrisy in many respects on the part of global North countries in their policies towards the global South are now, really causing great harm to their long-term interests. And I think this demonstrates that India's interests are not always aligned with the US. What we've seen with Modi and the decision on Iran and the BRICS and the talks with Xi, India is doing what India has always done, which is pursuing its own interests and its own national security concerns.
You mentioned the US and India being kind of key partners in the Indo-Pacific. Obviously, one of the key cornerstones of that relationship is the Quad security framework with the US, India, Japan, and Australia. Has that been weakened now? And, given that Taiwan plays such a sort of pivotal role in the thinking about security in the Indo-Pacific, is Taiwan's position more compromised now?
I think it's too early to say that the Quad has been weakened by this. And I think it's also, let's not overstate that any rapprochement between India and China is only going to be done in very small, intermittent, steps. But again, in terms of if I was waking up in Taipei and I'm waking up in Washington today to see the new configuration of the BRICS, it's a different world than it was on Thursday. And so if they don't take lessons away from what happened this week, then this is only going to accelerate in terms of the mobilization of global South countries aligned against US, G7, and even to some extent Taiwan interests.
That was editor-in-chief of the China Global South Project, Eric Olander, speaking to our reporter, Stash Butler. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has turned himself in to authorities in the state of Georgia and had his mugshot taken. This is the first time a former U.S. president has ever taken a mugshot. Trump is charged with attempting to reverse the results of the 2020 presidential elections and a dozen other felonies. Trump spent roughly 20 minutes at the jailhouse before heading back to his golf club in New Jersey. Trump is currently leading Republican Party polls to challenge current President Joe Biden in 2024. China has banned all imports of seafood products from Japan. This move comes after Japan began releasing treated radioactive wastewater from the wrecked Fukushima nuclear plant into the ocean on Thursday. Beijing has condemned that plan since Tokyo first announced it. Over 40% of Japan's seafood exports last year went to China and Hong Kong. The Tokyo Electric Power Company, which oversees the discharge, says it will compensate any losses caused by China's ban. Back in Taiwan, a new climate tax is causing controversy even before it's got off the ground. Bing Wang explains.
Just days after Taiwan established the environmental ministry, it's already causing a stir among climate groups. The ministry announced it would start collecting carbon fees beginning 2025, but climate groups said the government promised it would start a year earlier. Carbon emission fees are charges imposed on companies for the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, aimed at incentivizing emission reductions. The ministry says there wasn't a delay. The plan was always set to begin in 2025.
必须要累积113年整年的排放量为我们的征收基础。那这样的征收基础，厂商才能够依照这样的排放量来进行缴费。缴费的期程当然是114年。
Climate groups are concerned, suggesting that a fee rate should be set and collected by the end of this year.
如果不能够订定下的话，至少也可以比照说，像是新加坡的方式，能够是提出一个范围，让那个业者可以做一个所谓的减量政策规划的时候，有一个价格的依据。
Singapore uses a yearly scale system where carbon emission fees are increased every year. Environmental groups insist that the carbon fee should not be set too low and should be decided quickly. That way, businesses can lower their emissions each year and hopefully reach a net zero Taiwan by 2050. Klein Wang and Bing Wang for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan is set to reopen to some Chinese tourists, but with China still mostly banning its citizens from visiting, it's unclear how many will actually come. John Van Trieste has this story.
Taiwan plans to reopen its borders to some Chinese visitors, lifting one of its last pandemic-era travel restrictions. From September 1st, Chinese nationals will be able to apply to come to Taiwan as tourists once more. But there's a catch. China's government isn't keen on letting its citizens visit Taiwan as tourists. In 2019, it banned independent travel to Taiwan. This was part of China's strategy of inflicting economic pain on the country, which it sees as part of its territory.
自由行的客人含金量比较高了哈，而且他们的时间是比较自由哈，对这种商圈性的活动会有帮助哈。
And in 2020, China stopped all group tours due to COVID-19. It's begun allowing citizens to take tours to some places, but so far, Taiwan isn't on the list. So when Taiwan reopens, who will come? The hope is those who live outside the Chinese government's direct control, either Chinese living abroad or in the partly autonomous cities of Hong Kong and Macau. Around 93,000 Chinese citizens from outside China proper visited Taiwan in 2019 before the bans took effect. But the total number of Chinese visitors that year was over 2.7 million. Taiwan hopes that Chinese group tours, at least, can resume. And so the government's adopting a tourism limiting tactic of its own. It's telling travel agents they can only send 2,000 people a day on group tours to China. And it's offering 2,000 daily spots for Chinese tour groups to visit Taiwan.
我们希望能够对方能够清楚地理解我们的一个立场。
But whether this will work, and whether Chinese visitors can be wooed back to Taiwan, is still unclear. John Su and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's nursing shortage is forcing some major hospitals to cut the number of available beds. Taipei's Mackay Hospital cut 200 beds in recent months. It's one of several hospitals in northern Taiwan that are struggling as nurses quit the profession en masse. The stress of working during the COVID pandemic caused many nurses to change careers. Many who remain now say they're overworked and underpaid with too many patients. September will see new nursing graduates join the workforce, but experts say more nurses are leaving the profession than are joining, and that the shortage will continue until the core issues are addressed.
护理人员要照顾病人的时间就是拉得越来越长，拉得越来越长的时候，病人对于护理人员的这个不满，其实呢，心情、情绪的一个不舒服一定会更高。
Troubles continue for a once highly anticipated sports venue in northern Taiwan. The Hsinchu baseball stadium reopened last year after a 3-year, $40 million renovation, but it had major problems with building quality, causing the ballpark to shutter indefinitely. A new independent report has found the stadium's soil was of poor quality, resulting in serious drainage problems. It recommends a complete overhaul of the baseball field. Forestry officials in eastern Taiwan have rescued a rare Formosan black bear caught in a trap. The adult male bear was found up in a tree in Taidong with a rope trap around its left front paw. Officials have taken the bear to be treated and will release it back into the wild after it's recovered. Animal conservation officials have been working to protect the bears, offering cash rewards for people who report trapped animals. Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. I'm Eric Gao. Take care and see you next time.